This is augforums.com Real Talk, an unfiltered and independent perspective on Acumatica Cloud ERP. First, thank you to our sponsors, Repay, DataSelf, and Velixo. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Our sponsors track clicks, and every click helps to support this podcast. My name is Tim Rodman, and I want to mention two more things in this pre-recorded intro before we get started. First, I'm always looking for victims, guests, on the podcast. If you use Acumatica in any capacity, no matter how small, I'd love to talk with you. Check out augforums.com/podcast and click the link near the top of the page to learn about being a guest on the podcast. Second, I'd love to see you listed on my Rolodex. Check out the instructions at augforums.com/Rolodex to see how you can add yourself to the list. All right, that's it for the pre-recorded intro. Let's get started. Today is Friday, December 10th, 2021, and this is episode number 60, a conversation with Dominic Albrecht from Digital Planet about data. Dominic, thanks for coming on. I see on your LinkedIn profile, it says data lover, but what else do you do these days, and who do you work for?
Tim, thanks for having me on the show. I'm really happy to be here. I am currently the head of analytics at a company called Digital Planet. We are in South Africa. Hopefully, in the not too distant future, we will be spreading our wings internationally. But right at the moment, our primary focus is in the South African market. Yeah, let's put it that way.
And what does Digital Planet do? Are you primarily a data company or primarily an ERP implementation company? What's the main thing?
So we are quite a unique beast. Our company was one of the founders of the e-commerce movement in South Africa, and for many, many years we were almost exclusively the only e-commerce retailer in the country. Unfortunately, from what it seems in hindsight, we were a little bit ahead of the curve when we started in e-commerce in 1998. And around 2012, we transitioned out of the e-commerce market and running our own e-commerce stores into running e-commerce stores for larger corporates. And kind of that's been the area that we've played in for the last sort of 8 or 9 years. But at the moment, we're going through a little diversification phase again, and we're really all about enabling South Africans with access to technology and to education. So we work with some of those large corporates to establish a product offering, which they then offer on to their customers. These corporates are largely credit providers, and in our product offering that we make available through them, it gives their customers access to those technology products. And I'll touch on the education in a second. And so it largely has been around sort of the e-commerce and fulfillment type of solutions. We do a lot of the warehousing. We do a lot of the logistics and fulfillment, the warranty, the after sales that goes along with all of those tech products, because unfortunately, every now and again, they happen to fail. So we are very much in the idea of creating an all-encompassing solution that enables that tech to add real value in those people's lives. Just lately, we've been moving into more of the education space as well, and we've created a product which is quite unique in our markets, and really incorporates a lot of the various different education providers, things like the Udemy's, the edX's, the masterclasses of the world. And we make that available to our customers along with their tech product, and it gives them access to discounts, to value adds that would probably not be attainable to them in sort of the ordinary world. With the idea of incorporating tech and technology is really driven around the idea of enriching people's lives, of driving hopefully a little bit of prosperity in the country. Unfortunately, the South African education system is not quite what it should be, and what we're really trying to do is make a difference in that world with what we have put together, what we offer, and with the companies that we work with, which like I said, happen to be some of the biggest companies in the country.
And how'd you wind up working there? Maybe give us an outline of your career journey. I mean, let's go all the way back to university, and where'd you start off, and how'd you turn the corner, would you say, into what you're doing now?
I'm not going to talk too much about the misspent youth, because there were probably a lot of bars and a lot of beers down that road. But yeah, after a little bit of time traveling, I got back to South Africa, and I wound up at a company that provides sales incentives to their sales force. And one of the offerings that we had available at that time happened to be an e-commerce type solution where you were able to spend your loyalty points or your sales incentive earned points. And I looked after the online catalog, which at that time, again, I think was fairly unique. The business sort of evolved and moved to a largely more cash-based incentive program during my time there. But really, that was kind of the start. That's where it all kicked off, and the idea of e-commerce and logistics and fulfillment really was born back then. That was kind of 2006. Probably in the American market, it was decidedly more advanced at that stage as well. But South Africa is generally sort of around 2 or 3 years behind the sort of the more traditional Northern Hemisphere markets sort of 2 to 3 years behind. So it all started there, and kind of my love for insights and data and providing some insight and out of the numbers started at that point. And I really toyed around with sort of, probably in hindsight, fairly basic Excel type reporting at that stage, pulled out of all sorts of various different systems, but it was a start, and it kind of sparked an interest, and I really enjoyed doing it. And around 2010, kind of as the cash incentives became a bigger part of the business, the logistics and the fulfillment and the e-commerce side of things died down. So I decided to move on, and I spent 2 years in management consulting, in operational management consulting. A lot of it was spent on mines in Botswana and diamond mines, which was super interesting when you see those huge, big mining trucks trundling around big open pit mines, and trying to work out how to gain efficiencies out of the whole process. And in those projects, we really touched on everything from the procurement side of things right through down to kind of mining operations and the nitty gritty of maintenance and keeping those pieces of equipment running.
Can I ask you on that experience? I look at things like two sides of a coin, heads and tails. where you have process, which sounds like was your primary role, making things more efficient, things like that on one side of the coin. And then you have what I just call reporting, or you could call data analysis on the other side of the coin. And to me, if you just stay in one area, you miss the big picture. If you're just focused on efficiencies and you get all into the Lean Six Sigma stuff and you're just trying to make things faster, you miss the value side of things and why this matters. But then if you just do the data analysis side of things, a lot of times you don't even have the data that you really need, and you need to touch process in order to complete the picture from a data standpoint. That's been my experience. I'm curious, especially in that role that you had, which was not a data analytics role primarily. Did you find that data still complemented what you were doing and helped you maybe sell a new way of doing things when you're trying to make things more efficient?
Absolutely, 100%. I completely agree with you when you say you can't do one without the other. The reality of it is what you see and observe in the actual sort of functioning of the process is not necessarily what gets presented in the data and the information that gets extracted from the various different sources that hopefully you have access to. A lot of the minds that we had at that stage, they didn't really have particularly well built sort of data capturing type of systems. So again, I mean, the idea of starting simple and building something just kind of on a spreadsheet or a checklist or something like that starts developing a little bit of insight that gets you the ability to understand what is actually happening on the floor. So you can't use one without the other, like I said. So having a little bit of data to validate the observations that you gain, it helps to justify why certain actions are needed. It helps you quantify what could be done differently. It really helps you, let's call it sell it. I don't like to use that kind of word, but I guess the reality of it is when you're sitting in a room full of managers or whatever the case is, or decision makers, and you've got to substantiate why you want to do course A versus course B. Being able to kind of revert back to something quantifiable really, really works in your favor. And like I said, I think the world in 2010 was probably a fairly different place to what it is now, and not fairly, quite markedly different to what it is now. And minds are generally not particularly friendly when it comes to things like admin. Simple checklists at that time and check sheets and time logging and observational studies. And when I say observational studies, we often literally had people just standing in one place all day watching trucks and timing how long trucks came past, because that was the information that we needed. And by the end of the day, you were able to feedback and you were able to say, so-and-so was doing this and so-and-so was doing that. This is better than that. So please, can we try and do that the next day? And I think that a lot of what we focused on at that time was really, really all driven by that type of sort of basic insight. There was nothing advanced about it. If I think back to it, it probably gives me, it still gives me nightmares, but it worked. It achieved the job, and yeah, I can't say it was the easiest job in the world. Anybody who spent time on mines will quite easily relate to the fact that it's a really harsh environment, and consulting is really not a particularly easy job to do either. You generally only bring consultants in when something's going wrong, and you kind of need to deliver pretty quickly in that instance. So.
And everyone's really suspicious about you, right? They're kind of looking at you like, I don't really trust this guy.
Nobody ever welcomes consultants with open arms. That's not the way consultants are ever received. Yeah, so I guess a lot of it is really around the change management and managing the behavior of the people towards you and towards the sort of the things that you're trying to implement.
And being
So after
the head of
mar-
analytics now at Digital Planet, like, that sounds like a much nicer, fancier, cleaner title. But I've still heard from a lot of people who focus on data that what they call data janitor, that is still a big part of a role in any kind of data analysis. Would you find that even though you're not working with the mine, that's still a big part of things when you're trying to do analytics?
Do we deal with mess? Absolutely. Yes, 100% we deal with mess. I think the things that I learned in that consulting world, and the mining project was just one of them. There were multiple more. A lot of what I learned from sort of the logistics and the courier projects that I did subsequent to the mine really speaks to sort of the idea of the behavior change and the managing of expectations and the hand holding that people need to go through when they are dealing with a new way of work. And I think the reality of data is that often you're presenting a different way of doing things and a new way of doing things, and an understanding in terms of the insights, the metrics, the measures that you get that that need to be coached, that need to be mentored, that need to be ingrained and become part of the people that you're working with. So yeah, I think the skills that you learn in management consulting are wonderfully applicable in everyday life. If there was an easy way to learn it, I'm pretty sure it would be a very lucrative business. But yeah, easy things don't. How does the saying go? Easy things come hard. Something along those type of lines. But yeah, it's definitely a real part of everyday life nowadays.
You got to spend time in the mine, figuratively. You did it literally, but
yeah,
at least
literally,
figuratively.
Literally.
So, I could see how I like your point about selling it. And to me, there's maybe two angles to that. One would be, as a consultant, you've got to sell the funding for it. You've got to pitch. This is going to be the ROI that you get if you invest in this. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that first. Like, how do you approach a client and pitch the return on their investment that they would get? Do you do some like light analytics, and how do you sell that to the management side first?
So I can't claim that I was too terribly involved with sort of project onset at that time, and that was very many years ago. So I'm going to dig very deep into those dark recesses and claim that it really is around specific
or
projects.
Actually even now, like specifically now, being focused on analytics, how do you pitch an analytics project? Is it all about ROI, or are you kind of getting attached onto a larger project maybe, so you don't have to make as big of a sell?
No, I think in Digital Planet, at least, we as analytics work almost as an independent function within the business, and that allows us the freedom to work with whatever operational department we need to, whether it's finance, sales, ops. So we really do have the ability to work with whichever department sort of has the biggest pain points, and that always is sort of a prioritization nightmare, because everybody has demands, everybody has needs, everybody has pain points that they look to solve. And for us, we really try and approach it from the point of view of, let's figure out what we can do with the resources that we have. Now, if that means simple, basic, for lack of a better explanation, a check sheet or a little time log like that, we can prove a point, and we can iterate quite quickly through sort of experimentation phases and trial phases, and get to a point where we've got a workable concept. Now, if that workable concept at that point requires development work, or requires external support, whatever the case is, at that point, it becomes a hell of a lot easier to validate any kind of costs that are associated with that, because we've already got a working model. We've got something that is quantifiable, is justifiable, and we can go out and not waste the time, and I say waste loosely, in trying to spec and build and develop something that may or may not evolve at the end of it.
So you're just trying to get momentum in the beginning on something.
100%, exactly. Once you've got the momentum, and once you've got the behavior, and once you've got the sort of the action moving in the right direction, the sell almost becomes easier in and of itself, because people have already bought into the concept. People have already seen what it can do. And I find a lot of times when you're dealing with behavior change, that's the hardest part. Once people see what they can get out of it, and once they start realizing that there's more to it than just somebody's going to give me a report, that it leads to, that the one thing leads to another, and it starts opening up people's eyes, it almost becomes a self-perpetuating flywheel, because the momentum that you've built just keeps on building.
And so to clarify, in your current role, is it not client-based? It's all internal customers.
A lot of what we do is internal.
Okay.
We are building analytics solutions, and this is kind of something that's kind of only really gone live in the last, I want to say, 6 months or so, is client-facing analytics solutions, but really based off the processes and the work that we are doing with those clients. And there it becomes a little bit of a different situation, in that we're providing insight and we're providing value to clients off the information. We're providing the self-service ability on that information that normally would take their analytics teams, their BI teams. We're giving that to them in an easily digestible, insight-driven, storytelling type of format, as opposed to a bunch of Excel exports of hundreds of thousands of lines, which somebody needs to then go and sift through and kind of dig into in order to get what they need to. I'm very much of the opinion that the insights and the story that needs to come from that information needs to be clearly visible, and the harder somebody needs to work at it, the less they're spending doing the job that they're actually supposed to be doing. So whether that's information from Acumatica, whether that's information from operational systems, from data warehouses, whatever the case is, it really is, if you can pull those insights out, and I think in our world, we're pretty comfortable that we understand our processes really well, and we know where sort of the pain points generally are. The more we can make that information visible and accessible, the easier it is, and the better the conversations that we can have with people, instead of focusing on the sort of, let's call it the day-to-day burning operational type of issues. It becomes a much more strategic, forward-looking conversation.
To attach that quote report to some actual action, or I think you use the word change in behavior. And not just I'm fulfilling a reporting request need and I don't even know why you need it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've developed myself a little bit of a nickname, sort of Mr. Y, Dr. Y kind of thing, because when people ask me for reports, my first reaction is always why. And it's really not about trying to be difficult, but when people say that they want long lists of orders with whatever 10 or 20 or whatever different parameters or that go along with that, the first question that I ask is why, because there has to be something that they're looking to get out of that information. There has to be something that they're looking to do with that information. And at that point, I want to make life easy for them. I don't want them to have to go and sift through 10,000 lines. I want the insight of those 10,000 lines to be right at your face, right in your face, and accessible and actionable. Because at that point, you're able to spend whatever it is, a minute or two, understanding the information and then moving and acting on the information, which is ultimately what you should be doing, not necessarily worrying about whether this pivot table and that parameter, and that's how you need to interpret it and read it. It's never going to be quite that clear cut, and but if we can get 80% of it right, I feel like we're moving in the right direction.
Would you say that most of the time, at least in my experience, this is true, most of the time people don't necessarily know why, or at least they don't know why to the level of depth that you're looking for, and so it's not that you don't even know why you want this. It's more that you're just trying to help them understand and work through it with them. Would you find that's the case, or most time people really have thought it through and know what they're looking for?
I didn't get the nickname Mr. Y because I only ask why once. There's that little that 5-year-old analogy that's 5-year-olds ask why, I don't know how many thousands of times a day. I'm pretty sure I have most 5-year-olds beat, because I try and get down to the root of it, because a lot of times what I find is what they perceive to be the problem and what they perceive to be the information that they need in order to rectify that problem is not necessarily the right information, or is not necessarily the right problem. And through my whying, I often help and either uncover what the actual data is or uncover what the actual problem is. Unfortunately, and I'm pretty sure that this is not just a Digital Planet problem or a South African problem, I think this is a business in general problem, is that there are often knee-jerk reactions to a business problem, which when you actually start questioning it and thinking about it and interrogating it, you wind up solving a different problem instead of fixing a symptom, which is more often the case than what happens. If you can solve the root cause, if you can get down to the nitty-gritty of it, quite often the symptoms are not what needs to be solved, and the symptoms happen to get in the way of actually getting down to the root cause.
I like your word whying. I hadn't heard that before. And that, to me, what it makes me think of is whying sounds very similar to whining. And, especially with the 5-year-old example, a lot of times the whying, the curiosity just sounds like whining and complaining. And I think it's a real skill to learn how to ask questions without sounding combative, or without sounding like I'm just asking questions because I don't think your problem is important. How you have any like soft skill tips on how to ask why without even saying why, and how to join someone on the journey instead of being the prove it to me, why are you even in my office kind of come off that way.
Listen, I think that is a lifelong skill, and that is a one-on-one relationship type of thing that is never going to be particularly easy to get right. I think what you really need is a trust relationship with those people, because if they're trusting you that you're coming from a good place, if they trust that what you're trying to do is actually solve the problem, those conversations and those questions become a little bit easier to tolerate from their perspective. I have often been on the wrong end of the spectrum, where when you ask the why question, you get the defensive type of answers. And at that point, you've got to put your best EQ hat on and your best soft skills type of approach, and really try and uncover what it is that they're trying to solve, what their pain point is. What I found is that instead of asking somebody kind of what they want to see, because that often gives you those type of, well, we need a list of 10,000 lines and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you can reposition that in the way of what problem are you trying to solve, with what's your pain point, what is causing you to ask for this information, you often start getting a very different answer than if you ask the what do you want to see. But what do you want to see is often the superficial, is the symptom. And in order to get down to that nitty gritty, you need to get through that sort of 5 whys technique. But yeah, often asking the why question in a slightly more diplomatic way yields some better results. But you've honestly got to approach it from the point of view that I've got nothing but good intentions, and I want to improve, and I want to change, and I want to make this better for you. So help me help you. And
I like that. Yeah, maybe it's not so much about the specific questions or the specific words or the specific technique. You know, it's not that you're treating the other person like a computer and you need to learn the programming language to interface with them. It's a human relationship, and it really does come down to, I genuinely care. And, you know, my
absolutely.
personality type, my communication type maybe doesn't matter as much as that core level of human to human trust. And we'll get through it if that is there. Otherwise, all the techniques in the world maybe aren't going to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on, right? I mean, business really is about human relationships. As much as we like data, and as much as we like working with systems and kind of solving problems on our own, collaboration in this is key. And if you happen to misunderstand it, if you happen to get it wrong, or interpret it incorrectly, you've got to be able to put your hand up and say, listen, I screwed up, like help me get back on track. I think the key to something like that is really being able to iterate quickly and move fast. And that's why I'm very much of the opinion in those early stages, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. It doesn't have to be pretty, but it has to give you the right kind of answers, and it has to achieve something, and it has to create a different context than the one that was in existence before then.
So would you say most of the time you're just initially, to get momentum, capturing data in Excel?
Not necessarily capturing data in Excel, whether it's extracting from things like Acumatica or databases or whatever the case is, and doing some fairly basic manipulations, whether they're pivot tables or merging data sets or you know, I'm very much on the experimental bandwagon, and I try and kind of get a grip on sort of what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and develop almost a frame of reference that I can then hand over to my team, to developers, to external partners, that allow them to operationalize it, to systemize it, and by that stage hand it back over to the business people who are able to do something with it on a day-to-day, weekly, monthly type of basis.
That really resonates with me because I take the same approach with clients. The way I like to describe it is, hey, I'm not going to take on a list of 20 reports where I give you some estimate. I think it's going to take 100 hours. And then I go off into my dark cave and I come back 100 hours later with something. And to me, that never works, because reporting is always or I call it reporting, analytics, reporting, whatever word you want to use it for, is always this back and forth process. And I like doing the same thing. I like delivering something in a few hours because I know that once you see it, it's going to change what you're looking for. And so I want to get a minimum viable product back to you. I know it's not everything you asked for, but I want to get something back in your hands. And to me, Excel is a great tool to do that. I like using the power pivot functionality in Excel to iterate faster, get something back in your hands. Then I know you're going to come back to me with more questions, and we just keep that process of back and forth rather than the dark cave approach. So that really resonates with me. I like that.
And this is because I've burnt my fingers many times in the past. You take something on and you get what you think is a clear set of instructions, and you go off and you do days or weeks worth of work, and you come back and somebody says, but what about this and what about that, and now that I've seen this, can we do this, and can we exclude that and add this? And before you know it, what you've done is you've spent 3 weeks, a month, and however long, and what you don't have is an actionable, tangible product that somebody can do something with. So yes,
like you're saying, you might have been on the whiteboard the entire time.
You might have been sitting on the beach for the entire time, quite frankly, because it's not doing anything for them. So as far as they're concerned, you haven't actually achieved anything. And that's, I love the idea of playing in Excel. I'm a huge fan of Excel, and I know that it's almost a swear word in the data community. But there is nothing that allows you to experiment and to practice and to iterate quite as fast as Excel.
I totally agree. I like the analogy. Working with Excel is like working with clay. Working with other tools is like working with concrete. So, I build it hardens. I got to get out the jackhammer when you say I want to look at it differently. Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with that setting of expectations, that the end result is not going to be Excel, but Excel will be the vehicle to help us get there.
100%. Spreadsheets, and I mean, I think the skills and the things that you learn in spreadsheets enable you to build and to define and to conceptualize better long-term solutions for the people that you work with. You can't go to a developer and say to them, I want this and this type of stuff. If you can go to a developer and you say, I want this and this type of stuff, but here's the formula on how you do this. This is how you extract that. That's where you take this information from. It's only going to make the developers' work easier and quicker to build and deliver an end result. You're doing a little bit of the, let's call it the grunt work in advance of it going to the people who really cost money. We can call developers that.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't do it that way. They go right to the developer, and it's sort of like building a building without a blueprint, right? And it costs a lot more money when you do it that, because there's a lot more demolition work involved.
And there's a lot of more building and demolition and rebuilding and redemolition and rebuilding and redemolition work. Yes, there is nothing that kind of makes my blood boil more than sort of wasting developer time and on things like rework because a requirement hasn't been defined correctly. You're never going to get it right 100% of the time, but the old 80-20 principle is really something that sort of sits well with me. And if you can put something in somebody's hands that they can use in the interim, whether it's an Excel sheet and you can give it off to a developer who can build it out into something that is more than what you had envisaged to begin with, that's the ideal for me. And absolutely, there are far too many businesses that don't invest the right amount of time in defining the solution, figuring out what it is that we want to achieve. I just finished reading a book, a really interesting book, two chaps that used to work at Amazon. The book's called Working Backwards. And they talk very much about the idea of the sort of the press release and the FAQ type of document that they need to develop for a new product, a new solution. And by defining that product, defining those FAQs, defining the press release, doing all of that work, it really helps hone the solution, figure out all the nitty-gritties, define the value that it's going to deliver. And you do all of that before it touches anybody who actually has to bang some keys and to figure out technically how it works. I love the idea. I think it is such a perfect way to go about things.
How would you then match that to analytics? Because that almost sounds like the opposite approach to let's build something and get something in someone's hands. That almost sounds like spending more time on the whiteboard, and then people maybe get suspicious about it.
So my whiteboard is Excel.
Gotcha.
My PR and FAQ are the insights and the story that's coming out of that. I don't want to go and invest developer time to build the whole long solution, and then you get to the end results and going, actually, this is not the insight that you wanted. This is not the output that you were looking to achieve. So yes, my Excel is my whiteboard. I've never described it like that, but I think that's a really interesting way of going.
I like that. And are you using the like Power Query, Power Pivot functionality a lot, or just regular Excel formulas? Let's geek out on Excel for a minute here.
Yes, absolutely. Super happy to geek on Excel. Complete fanboy. No, I mean, there's obviously a whole bunch of functionality in Excel that you can do. I've managed to keep it simple, but that's just kind of my way of work. I don't necessarily go down the sort of the Power Pivot type of route because I just haven't had the need. Normal pivot tables work perfectly well with the type and volume of data that we're dealing with. And if it doesn't necessarily work quite that well, I've got some fairly basic SQL skills that I can kind of get myself that I can do enough to do damage with, and that just helps me get it to a point where whatever you've got in Excel is usable, and I keep it really basic. Lookups, pivot tables, and conditional formatting, if statements, that type of stuff. I've yet to come across something that I haven't been able to solve with that type of approach.
Interesting. And you find that it's also refreshable, and that you can refresh it with the click of a button, not have to rebuild the whole thing?
If you're smart about how you do it, and yes, sometimes smart is something that you learn the hard way. I have things that I absolutely need a little bit more than 5 minutes to sort of update. But generally, I mean, kind of 5 minutes of an update and refresh a couple of pivot tables. And yes, it's maybe not one button, it's a couple of buttons, but it's really not super hard to do.
Well, that's not bad, especially when you think about Excel being your whiteboard, in that if we go to the 80-20 rule, you're looking to get someone 80% of the way there. And then if they want that final 20%, that's usually 80% of the cost, to go to the developer, but they can still, they can do that if it really takes off. And that's another thing I like about Excel is it's the proof of concept, it's the whiteboard, and then you can find out if people actually use it. Is it just one person's a good idea, or now does it spread like wildfire in an organization, get used by a lot of people? If so, you've already justified your cost, right? And hopefully the person even who approves the cost is one of the people who's using it already, right?
That's called picking your targets, customers, making sure you're dealing with the right people and making sure that the right people get the right value out of it. Absolutely. I think a lot of what we need to do in the analytics reporting kind of community is get better at merchandising and marketing exactly what we have managed to do. Unfortunately, a lot of the execs and sort of the people that control the purse strings are not necessarily the frontline users of reports and the insight type of things. So writing up a little case study and validating the work that you've done and justifying all of those type of things comes back to that earlier idea of selling. And whether you do it, whether you coach the sort of the operational, the line manager, the area managers, in presenting that type of information back to their execs, I think it is 100% a part of a process and a part of something that I guess almost as a tech community as a whole that we need to get better at. Tech often kind of just needs to work and nobody really questions what kind of value it adds until it goes wrong, until it breaks. That's what we need to, that's a big part of what we need to do.
I like that. Yeah, I think you used the word storytelling earlier. I've listened to a number of podcast things on like data storytelling. And to me, it's not, when I first heard that phrase, I thought, okay, you're just taking data and using it to make whatever story you want it to say, which unfortunately is done a lot. But I don't think that's what it means. What most people mean when they say that is exactly what you said. It's not just doing the hard skill stuff of building the report, but it's then explaining what it does and marketing it to have a broader reach and also to make that connection to management in terms of why it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, data storytelling is really about getting people to understand, to absorb, to internalize the information. The data and the facts and the metrics and the measures and all of those things are there in order to support the story. The story is what people are going to remember. People are not necessarily going to focus on the fact that this metric was 75% this month and last month it was 63%. They're going to remember that we've improved in this area. And if the other thing is going to, if it went from 75 to 63, they're going to remember that we've got worse, and they're going to try and do something about it. They're going to use and internalize the fact that there's a value, there's an absorption that they've got out of it, and that's the thing that sticks with them. That whether it's 75 or 63, quite frankly, doesn't really matter. It's about the fact that it sticks with that person. There's nothing worse than sitting in a presentation where somebody presents 25 graphs, and by the time you've got to graph 3, you've forgotten what's on graph 1 because there was nothing that stuck with you. It was almost data for data's sake. An analogy that I always use. Unfortunately, American sports, I find, have a ridiculous amount of stats and metrics and measurements.
Yeah,
but
totally agree.
What do they mean? What is it actually telling me? Like, quite frankly, if the guy had green underpants and he shot a 3-pointer from the left side of the court, at that point, who cares? Like, what is it doing for me? I would rather have 2 or 3 measurements that tell me something, that tell me whether the guy is good or bad, or if he likes the rain or he doesn't like the rain. That's you're going to stick with. But 25 metrics that measure whether he can shoot with his left hand and his left foot forward, like, quite frankly, who cares?
Yeah, I feel like it's more important to connect with someone emotionally than to connect logically, because the emotional part will stick better than just presenting all the data logically.
Absolutely. The logic needs to come in at some point when you get on into sort of the problem solving and the sort of the let's call it the problem solving, the optimization, the opportunity identification, all of those type of things. But those are not necessarily the type of things that you're going to be looking at day in and day out. Those are the sort of the deep dive type of stuff. And for me, there's a clear, distinct type of way in which we go about it. If you're having a good day or a bad day, that's the type of measurement that everybody wants to see once a day kind of thing. If it's a bad day, then you've got your sort of supporting metrics that what levers that you can pull. Those kind of tell you whether it's where's your problem. And then below that, you've got all the sort of the really, really deep dive type of stuff that kind of identify microscopic elements and probably the American sports type of measurements.
A quick time check. We're coming up against the top of the hour. Do you have another 10 minutes or do you have another call to run?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I was wondering if we could, then we haven't talked much about Acumatica. Maybe you could fill us in on, I'm not clear myself. Is Digital Planet Acumatica VAR, or have you just come across Acumatica in analytics projects that you've been working on? How does Acumatica fit into all this?
So up until timeline escapes me exactly, probably about 3 years or so, we were still running Sage or Sage Pastel type of solutions for all our accounting and sort of stock processing type of requirements, and it became completely unscalable for the business that we wanted to be. So we went out into the market and we did a lot of sort of understanding in terms of what ERPs were available. We're not the biggest enterprise in the world. We're definitely not the smallest. So we kind of sit sort of in that in-between layer where you need to find something that's cost effective, but offers you more functionality and bigger kind of scale and reach than what you had previously. And we went through a fairly extensive process, and we evaluated a couple of different solutions, and eventually wound up with Acumatica as kind of the best of the rest kind of thing, the solution that kind of best fit our requirements and gave us kind of 80-90% of what we wanted. I don't think any software solution, SaaS type of platform, is ever going to achieve 100%. So it's really about what are your main buttons and which ones are you prepared to compromise on. So we've been running Acumatica for, I want to say 3 years. It might well be 2.5. It might well be a little bit longer than that. But it's been an interesting journey. I think I'm really happy that we've made the switch, because what it's done for us as a business is definitely improve our operations, definitely improve our cohesion, definitely provide us with a more holistic view of the business than we did before. There's a lot to learn, and I think something like Acumatica is almost a how long is a piece of string kind of thing. There's always something more that you can do. We're not, unfortunately, Tim Rodman, so we don't have years worth of experience and expertise in the platform. But
I got to jump in there and say that no one knows everything about Acumatica, especially me. I just like learning new things. Yeah. And I don't think there's anyone at Acumatica either, because there's just too many different areas. It's too broad. And that's the case with any ERP product, right? No one knows everything. And that's why community, I think, is so important, connecting people together.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's something that's really positive about the Acumatica community is, and kind of the platform that you've created, is the ability for people to get together and share information and learn from one another. Whether it exists on kind of some of the bigger platforms, I don't know. I haven't looked. I would hazard a guess to say that not to the same extent. I think Acumatica is almost a little bit different in that regard, in that it's not a SAP or an Oracle or something like that. That's kind of absolutely massive. I think Acumatica is at the point that it is still small enough that it is a sort of a community of people that use it. Obviously, I think it's not hugely well known, probably growing, but yeah, I don't think there's anybody that knows everything about it. And to your point, we're all uncovering things on a daily basis that work and things that don't work and things that you have to figure out how to make work to fit your requirements.
And as a data person, how have you found it? I guess one question I have is, are you running SaaS or on-prem? And then it sounds like you're doing things in Excel a lot, but are you also using the Acumatica reporting tools? And if so, what's the experience been like so far?
So we're running it in a SaaS environment. We are very much of the opinion that the less hardware we have to deal with, the better. Nobody wants to have those kind of problems in this day and age. So we implemented in the cloud straight from the get-go, which has been fantastic, especially over the last 2 years, where kind of everybody's decentralized from a single environment into multitude of environments, which is good and bad in equal measures, and it's probably really accelerated the adoption of the sort of the cloud type of environment, is the ability to work from anywhere.
I know a lot of data people, like, they don't want to give up their SQL connection. Has that been painful for you? Are you using OData or Acumatica reporting tools?
No, I mean, we've managed to kind of be clever about that and lock that stuff down quite stringently, and all pretty well governed and controlled. But yes, I'm definitely one of those people that's not giving up my connections, because when and I have to say this, that I don't find Acumatica reporting particularly friendly. I really think that is a massive area of growth. I mean, the GI builder in Acumatica really feels like Crystal Reports from 1997.
Report designer, you mean? You mean report designer, right?
I'm talking about GIs within the Acumatica
really?
interface.
Okay.
I find that just completely and utterly horrific. I try and do as little as I can in report designer, but if we have to, we have to. So yeah, I really do believe that there's a lot of opportunity for growth and development. I've seen a couple of solutions out there and sort of what can and is possible. I know, oh God, I can't, the Data Self or something like that has an option with a Tableau. I definitely like to see more of that type of solution. And I mean, the truth of what you're trying to achieve with an Acumatica is a single place. So the less we can force people to export data into Excel, the more we can make it actionable and visible on screen in browser type of view, the more we're going to get adoption of sort of ERP type of implementations. I don't think any software provider anywhere in the world can claim that they have 100% adoption. But the more you can make it a single unified experience where everything you need is in one central place and you don't have to sort of bounce around between applications, it's only going to drive the adoption more. It's only going to drive the experience more. It's only going to make people want to do more in the environment. Ultimately, what we're trying to achieve, whether it's with a platform, whether it's with reporting, whether it's with analytics, insights, whatever you want to call it, is an experience for the user of what we're building, what we're presenting, what we've made available for them, that makes them want to come back. People are fantastically good at finding workarounds, and I need to find a diplomatic way of saying this, but getting to a point where they don't have to do things in the prescribed way, but that's because the experience is crap. Like, let's figure out how we make the people who we serve, who we enable, how can we make them want to use the thing that we've put in front of them?
I agree. And most of that experience, in my opinion, is reporting. If you're just trying to force them to put data into a system, it's like, why? They're asking why. You got to show them what they're going to get back out of it to motivate them to put data in. Yeah.
I'm very much of the opinion that in this day and age where there's kind of so much information overload in every shape or form, that we need to get better at the idea of management by exception. And the way we can do that is by creating those reports, those insights, those analytics in a platform that allow us to help people. You know, to your point, putting in information, every now and again, somebody's going to make a mistake. That's life. It happens. But if you can make that type of information visible and clear and actionable to them, they don't need to pull out a report. They can go and double check themselves. Nobody wants to do a bad job. Bad jobs happen, but we can help their experience to a point where that type of thing doesn't become a reason for them not to want to do it.
One thing I like doing is creating a stuff that should never happen dashboard. And it's either all green, or if there's any reds, it's just the regular KPI widgets, just green and red KPI widgets, just as many as you want on the screen. I take a quick scroll through it. If I see any reds, I know I have something I need to address. I don't want to go run reports and get out my calculator, do math, figure stuff out. Just present it right to me in colors, green or red, done. That's all I need.
and that's exactly it. That's the experience. If you can make it that easy for somebody, they're going to want to do a good job. The more you hide that type of stuff and the more difficult you make it for that person, the less they're going to care ultimately. And that's not what you want. And the last thing you want is for a good employee to be put off by a bad system or a bad experience.
I totally agree. Hey, I want to respect your time. I appreciate you going over and sharing data thoughts. I really like coming at Acumatica from a data angle, because I completely agree with you that delivering that and that insight, and maybe I could have you back on in the future to talk more details about, the specific tools you've been using than Excel, and, how you're delivering that with Acumatica, challenges you're having, et cetera. But I really enjoyed this conversation today.
So thank you. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned something about what I've said today. So hopefully I'll when I listen to the podcast, I'll get something out of this as well. We're about to go through a massive sort of reporting journey on the Acumatica platform. So maybe this time next year we can reconvene and figure out what's worked and what hasn't worked. I can guarantee you I'm going to be picking your brain a little bit over the next little while. So I'm looking forward to figuring this out and hopefully working with you on making something more valuable for us.
Ooh, this sounds fun. I'm looking forward to 2022. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks so much.
Care. All right. Well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of AUGforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening, and take care.